Hey, Fidelity, how can I remember to invest every month?
With the Fidelity app, you can choose a schedule and set up recurring investments in stocks and ETFs.
Oh, that sounds easier than I thought.
You got this.
Yeah, I do. Now, where did I put my keys?
You will find them where you left them.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
This episode is brought to you by Abercrombie. Build your fits of the day with Abercrombie's newest denim drop. Here's where to start. Abercrombie's 90s straight jean goes with any shirt from tees to sweater polos. Super versatile. Their loose and baggy jeans are more trend forward, so you can grab those and go out with your friends. Abercrombie's denim fits come in a range of washes. Build your looks around Abercrombie denim. Shop online or in store.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Jay. So, as usual, there are a number of things that we wanted to get to, but weren't able to get to on the regular show. But it's still all part of, aside from the Ukraine thing, it was sort of a theme, right? Donald Trump's attempt to increase executive power, executive authority in various, which makes sense because Congress moves so slow. I mean, they've only sent one bill to Donald Trump's desk for his signature in the first month of his presidency. That's not even exceptionally slow. It's just, if you want to get stuff done, you got to do it yourself, whether you're the president or, I don't know.
I think that's actually pretty damn quick, actually.
They had that one kind of teed up in some ways. But yeah, so one in a month, it's not surprising. But anyway, so in the weekend show, we were talking about independent agencies and presidential authority to hire and fire. And all of this ties into, I think, another and related effort by the Trump administration to expand presidential control. And this is the firing of special counsel Hampton Dellinger. On February 7th, Dellinger was informed that he was terminated in a one-sentence email that just literally said, you're terminated effective immediately with no reason given for the firing. 3 days later, Dellinger sues, and he argues, understandably so, that the firing was unlawful because, according to the statute that created his position, the special counsel can only be removed by the president for inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance in office. And as no reason was given, that was almost on the face of it unlawful. Now, district court judge agreed with Dellinger, issued a temporary restraining order that reinstated him for 14 days. In her ruling, Judge Amy Brennan, an Obama appointee, wrote that the statute, in her words, expresses Congress's clear intent to ensure the independence of the special counsel and insulate his work from being buffeted by the winds of political change. Very nice kind of turn of phrase there, almost something I'd expect from a Jay Carson amicus brief, but that's another story, But that's not how the administration sees it. In their request to the Supreme Court to reverse Dellinger's reinstatement, DOJ attorneys wrote that this case, in their words, involves an unprecedented assault on the separation of powers that warrants immediate relief because the president should have unrestricted power of removal of executive officers that were appointed by previous presidents. Now, Dellinger responded to this by saying that it would be inappropriate for the Supreme Court to step in at this point, arguing that the administration was asking the court to essentially create an exception for a president to a settled rule or a more or less settled rule that TROs can't be appealed unless they are essentially de facto preliminary injunctions, which last for considerably longer, generally speaking. So, Jay, on that, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems to me, if I understand correctly, the main distinction is that a TRO is designed for a very short-term pause. We're talking days to a couple of weeks, whereas a preliminary injunction, that generally applies for a longer period.
Correct. A TRO is to apply, and part of what the applicant must show is that there's going to be immediate irreparable harm. if the court doesn't do something right away. And TROs can be granted even ex parte. But then what happens is the court has to schedule a full hearing for a preliminary injunction. I think the rule is, well, the Ohio rule, it's like 14 days, but you can, the parties can obviously agree. Otherwise, the court can move stuff around. But the idea is you get a preliminary injunction fairly expeditiously, and that lasts typically through the remainder of the trial until there's a final judgment on the merits.
And so in some ways, as a legal, I guess my understanding of one of the legal issues that Dellinger is raising is that it's pretty extraordinary to ask the Supreme Court to step in and overturn a 2-week long-lasting TRO that a district court judge has imposed.
Yes, it would be unusual, and most likely the court would say, "Wait till we get at least a preliminary injunction." Even a lot of preliminary injunctions aren't appealable immediately. Some are, some aren't. But
I guess I should, I guess I should point out, I didn't mention this, but the Office of Special Counsel, and Dellinger is the special counsel who heads the Office of Special Counsel. That's a different thing than the special counsels that sometimes the Attorney General appoints for specific investigations, like, for instance, Jack Smith. The main focus of the Office of Special Counsel is federal employee protection. So, like, protecting whistleblowers, ensuring that the Hatch Act is being complied with, which prevents certain political activities from government workers. They investigate, they prosecute cases that involve discrimination, nepotism, retaliation, that sort of thing. So it's kind of like a federal employee watchdog agency, if you will. Now, my sense of things legally, Jay, is that Dellinger is probably right on the TRO issue, but I think there's a reasonable chance he might end up sort of winning this temporary battle, but losing the war. What do you think?
I think that's right. And also, I misspoke when I said preliminary. When I said preliminary injunction, when I meant TRO, as far as typically not appealable. So, just wanted to correct that. Yeah, I would say preliminary injunctions are typically appealable, albeit I think there could be some subsets that might not be for weird reasons. But anyway, TROs would not, because of the idea that you're going to have a more full hearing on the merits, or at least partially on the merits, within a short time period. So, yeah, I think he's probably right there that no appellate court is going to touch this yet. But it goes back to the idea of who's the executive here, and to what extent can Congress rein in authority that is granted to the executive under Article 2. And I do think that the president has a pretty good argument there.
Or at least he would have, I think, an argument that 4 or 5 members of the current court would be receptive to, but it would definitely go against something like 90 years of precedent on this issue. Yeah,
I think so. But this is, again, something that he's trying to push.
Sure.
Of who is the executive here, and I think that's a good argument to be had.
And certainly, it's like, as I said, in that other context on the weekend show, it's not an unreasonable argument to make. And it occurred to me also that on the weekend show, you said, well, you can make maybe a better case for an agency like the Fed to be at least somewhat independent. And I think you're right about that. I think you can perhaps make the same sort of argument about a whistleblower protection agency, right? Because the case you can make is that independence is particularly, or partial independence is particularly important when we're talking about an agency that protects executive branch whistleblowers from executive branch retaliation.
Yeah, but isn't sort of the problem right there? And as you phrased it, an executive branch agency protecting against the executive branch. That's sort of what the whole problem is. I would agree with you that it's a problem if you are firing whistleblower protectors. But I think the remedy, again, is not a legal remedy. It's a political remedy. It's the look what Trump's doing. This is terrible.
But that doesn't really help the whistleblower. And it had more than a little bit of a chilling effect.
Well, the whistleblower can be helped by Congress through whistleblower protection statutes.
Yeah, and I appreciate
you don't
that.
have to have an employee of the executive carrying it out for you.
But of course, this gets into the question of, with the Office of Special Counsel, they obviously are set up to act much more quickly than the court system, and a federal employee can bring some of these initial claims. Well, let me just finish here. Okay. Can bring some of these claims anonymously, where court filings, of course, are public things. Then there's the whole thing about you need to hire a private attorney to bring suit, and this can get very costly and so forth. Whereas with OSC, a lot of that essentially is in place for you. And I would argue that if you are truly concerned about government waste, fraud, and abuse, which I don't think for a minute that Donald Trump really is, but if you are, you would want to try to find ways to strengthen protections and resources for whistleblowers. But my sense, as I said in the weekend show, is that it's not really about government efficiency and transparency. It's about enhancing the power of Donald Trump.
Well, I would disagree with you on the ability of the court system to handle these cases quickly and private attorneys to take the cases. Whistleblower statutes are going to give you attorney's fees. You have people out there who would be happy to jump in on these sorts of cases. You can go to courts, just like Dellinger did, and get a TRO. All right, so that's it. It moves quick. It happens quick, and there's the remedy. I think it's a good argument to say, well, should the executive branch have someone watching over potential whistleblowers against other executive branch problems overreach? Sure, maybe, but at the end of the day, that's still an executive branch decision.
And so you're saying even
I don't see the. I think you're making a good policy argument.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, right?
But I don't know that it's a constitutional argument.
And I suppose Congress could create special, if you will, whistleblower courts in a way, right? Because that would be a judicial function, and that
but they don't really have to, because you already have courts,
right? Yeah. But I mean. There obviously, as you know,
if you wanted to, you could.
Yeah, there are specialized federal courts who deal with various things like bankruptcy and other things like that. And you could make you can make an argument that perhaps there's a good reason for doing that sort of thing, and that it might be a particularly good reason for setting up some sort of a system that would be designed in some way to provide more confidentiality, at least on the front end, and make whistleblowers feel a little more comfortable coming forward. Because I'll tell you, I was actually early in my many years ago, I was a whistleblower, not at NKU. NKU didn't do anything I felt the need to blow a whistle on, but it's a scary experience. You know, I said I saw some things that I felt were very wrong, that were I felt covered up, and I stepped forward anonymously. And there was a real witch hunt atmosphere. People all around me saying, who is this horrible person who's doing this? And we should rid ourselves of this person. And it was like, there was definitely a big chilling effect. And I knew that was going to happen. And this is not exactly big stakes exactly, but I can appreciate how if you're not Dellinger, if you're not somebody who is already pretty much at the top of the heap and has resources and protections, you're just some lower level type person, that's a whole different sort of thing. I mean, you take the example, and I'm not entirely unsympathetic to some of the arguments that, for instance, Tulsi Gabbard makes about Edward Snowden. Now, I think he broke the law, and I think he has to pay consequences for that, but I think there are elements there saying that, you know, if you are a whistleblower and you know the full might of the executive branch is going to just descend upon you, that's going to make you a lot less likely to blow the whistle.
Yeah, that's the nature of politics and life and business. And
well, sure, but
I don't know that. Yeah,
I agree, but I think it's one thing to say that this is how it will inevitably be, another thing to say, and there's nothing we can do about it. I think there are things that we can do about that, and which is why I think there is an important role for not just the Office of Special Counsel, but inspectors general who are independent. And of course, as we know, Donald Trump fired a number of them, and those are going through various legal cases and so forth. And I guess that's my concern, is that what I see, even if I maybe end up granting a lot of your legal arguments, I guess when I pull back, I see an executive who is in a better time, perhaps, would be constrained by custom, would be constrained by precedent, by, I'll even say, decency, and would be constrained by a Congress that might not be so frightened of the executive. But none of those things exist today. And so it really makes me worry about what this portends for the future, not just Donald Trump, but Donald Trump, I think, is setting up a template for, future presidents. And that, I think, is a very dangerous sort of thing.
So, again, I go to the argument, the constitutional argument isn't whether having some agency to protect whistleblowers is a good idea or a bad idea, or whether having Dellinger run it is a good idea or a bad idea. It's who gets to make that decision in the executive branch, if it's an executive agency. As I said, I think there's a lot that Congress can do and has done, passing whistleblower protection laws, and there's courts, separate branch, to enforce them. And as you pointed out, Congress could create more courts if it wanted to, or could even draft tougher laws if it wanted to. But I guess where I come down is if the executive branch doesn't want this person running that agency, that has to be the executive branch's decision. And the executive branch is a guy named Donald Trump, because that's Article 2 says all power of the executive shall be vested in the president.
And I want to be clear. I think
and also, again, there's the political remedy of, you seem to say, well, look, this is terrible because no one will stand up to him. And he could, well, look, he won, and he won. I think it was a solid electoral victory. It wasn't a popular vote landslide by any means. He's got really narrow majorities in both houses. So don't sell Congress short. And also the idea is that he is a lame duck as of day one. So,
well, yeah, and he is a lame duck, though Elon Musk is certainly not a lame duck. And we'll get into that in a little bit here. But I hear your arguments, and actually, and if I wasn't clear enough on this, I apologize. I actually think that you may have the better constitutional argument. So I'm actually...
Of course I do.
Well, yeah, so I guess my larger point is, it feels to me like in a previous era, there were certain things that constrained presidents that for various reasons no longer do, and depending on how you look on it, the genius or the tragedy of Donald Trump is that he has decided to ignore all of those constraints and push things much further than any president certainly since FDR, possibly since Lincoln, you can make the case. And I think where you and I agree is that the courts are going to side with him on some of this stuff. And what's going to happen is Donald Trump will leave the presidency much more powerful for himself and future presidents. At least that's my take.
Much more powerful, but also more accountable.
How more accountable?
I think that's the other thing. If you're tying the executive, you're really saying, yes, I, the president, am in charge of all these executive agencies. Then the president owns it, and the president's party owns it. And that, to me, is what's important about the accountability piece. It's something, the more troubling thing is this agency did this by rule and that sort of thing. And the, president and Congress, Congress can kind of shrug their shoulders and, hey, geez, wasn't us. It's this crazy agency. And the president can sort of shrug his shoulders and just not make a comment about it. But if you are saying, I am the executive branch and I'm responsible, and in a Harry Truman-esque sort of buck stops here type way, and then that does restore some accountability to the system. And maybe Donald Trump gets, or his successor, his potential successor, suffers the electoral consequences, or maybe Republicans suffer the electoral consequences in the midterms. And to me, that's what is a good thing, right? That there is somebody that the buck stops with them.
I would agree with you if I thought that's how the system actually worked in all but the most prominent cases. But I think for for most of the time, most of these cases are not nearly that prominent. And so a president can ruin the lives of a bunch of people, or certainly impact them in a very negative way, and avoid any real accountability. You wouldn't want me to, but I could go on and on about stories about how the essential dismantling of the CFPB has resulted in all sorts of problems for all sorts of Americans that aren't the kind of things where you'd say like, oh my God, this is colossally, horribly bad, but just allows a lot of bad actors to get away with a lot of stuff. And because there is technically accountability, electoral, I guess you could say accountability, but not really, because people don't mostly give a damn, then so yeah, I don't necessarily, I hear what you're saying, and I think in theory it's true, but in practice it doesn't work out that way most of the time.
Let me just close by asking it this way, though. Who would you have run the executive branch?
I think the setup as it is not all that bad. I think that there is a role for semi-independent agencies structured as they are. So I agree. I think in the end, this is painful for me to say that, for instance, having a single person run the CFPB as it was originally set up and not have the president be able to fire that person, that goes beyond what's okay. But the structure that's been used for most of the past century, where you have these boards serving long staggered terms that, the president can appoint with Senate approval, but can't fire without cause, I think that's a pretty good compromise solution, and I'd like to see that continue.
Build a routine with Ollie that supports your wellness needs, like getting your daily vitamins and minerals with Ollie's multi-gummies, or keeping your mood upbeat with all the vitamin D in Hello Happy. Give your gut health some support with probiotics, and wake up feeling refreshed after taking Ollie Sleep. Do wellness on your terms. Find Ollie at a Walmart or Target near you, or at ollie.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Moms, tired of overthinking every decision around what's best for your kids? Stop. Get Smarty Pants vitamins and worry about one less thing. Smarty Pants Kids Multi and Omegas support kids' overall health with 16 daily nutrients, including vitamin C for immune support and D3 for bone health. That's 45% more nutrients than the leading kids multi-gummy brand. Seems like a no-brainer, right? Get Smarty Pants on Amazon today.
Okay. I am sticking with Alexander Hamilton, who wrote in Federalist 70 that energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government.
God, if you think
a feeble executive leads to a feeble execution and a bad government.
Well, that seems like
very bad government, very bad, terrible government.
That seems like a very untraditional Republican thing, because I always thought you guys revered, was it Calvin Coolidge and all of those sort of do as little as possible executives. It sounds like what you're arguing for is kind of right-wing activism in the presidency, or maybe I'm wrong about that.
No. What I'm arguing for is everyone staying in their appropriate lanes.
Got it.
And the president being able to be the president. So that's I would very much and sort of to that same point, right? Push back on executive overreach where you have executive agencies essentially making the law, right? That would be, yeah. So I would see an expanded role for the president, in his ability to hire, fire, direct these administrative agencies. But I also would wish for, and we've sort of gotten it, and I think we're moving in that direction, less agency power and more well-defined rules as far as what rules agencies can make and how they're able to.
And I would say it makes sense that this comes from the right, because it really is sort of asymmetric in the sense that we on the left tend to favor more agency power, them doing more things. And a lot of what Donald Trump is attempting to do with agencies is to slash and burn, essentially, which is, and so, that's why clearly this makes sense that this is coming from the right, and that there's much more of a concern with the administrative state from you guys on the right than from us on the left.
I know you're a Parks and Recs fan.
Oh yeah.
There's the wonderful quote from Ron Swanson where he says, my idea of the perfect government is one man who sits alone in a room, and the only decision he's allowed to make is who to nuke. There's something to that, right?
Well, if you are a small government conservative, there absolutely is. To me, it is. To me, I believe that government can be incredibly important force for good and incredibly important counterweight to big business. And so while I find Ron Swanson to be a compelling character, his theory of government makes me just, So anyway, I'm much more of a Leslie Noper than a Ron Swanson.
I know. That's
But just as Leslie and Ron got along just fine, you and I can do the same. So anyway, but why don't we move on and talk a little bit about DOGE? Because one question might be, that's come up lately, is who's in charge of DOGE? And, I think most people would say, well, that's an easy one. It's Elon Musk, because after all, Donald Trump himself said that Musk would be co-head of DOGE with Ramaswamy, who left the position before.
He sort of bailed to go to, governor of Ohio.
Yeah. But then there was, of course, Musk and Ramaswamy wrote that Wall Street Journal op-ed where they said they were leading the agency. But if you actually read the executive order that established DOGE, it calls for a DOGE service administrator who reports to the White House chief of staff. But in a filing recently before Judge Tanya Chutkan, who's hearing that case on the 14 Democratic state attorneys general they filed against the agency, the administration said that Musk is not only not the DOGE service administrator, he's not even an employee of the DOGE service, which I think comes as a shock to
work here.
I don't even know. What's he even doing? I don't know. Now, the administration claims that Musk is a senior advisor to the president with no actual or formal authority. And more specifically, he's considered a special government employee. And special government employees, or SGEs, they've been around since 1962. And the idea behind the rule was to allow
those same government employees have been around.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But no, right there, they couldn't have been by law, because part of the law says the idea was to get these outside experts to come in for a limited amount of time to help out on specific issues. But by law, that limit is no more than 130 days during any 365-day period. So they basically have to be, in that sense, sort of like not full-time, year-round employees. And also, SGs are exempted from filing certain financial disclosures. They're subject to less stringent outside activity, less stringent conflict of interest restrictions. But that said, they aren't allowed to participate in things by law in which they'd have a direct financial interest. So I thought there are a couple things we could do here, Jay, but I thought before we got into all of these DOGE issues, I'm curious about what you think about SGEs in general. I mean, do you think they're a good idea or not? And maybe more specifically in Musk's case, do you think the Trump administration is sort of abusing or overstepping by calling him an SGE and not really running DOGE, when it seems like in reality, if he's not not the de jure head of DOGE, he is the de facto head of DOGE, I guess.
Yeah. Well, again, going back to my unitary executive theory, I'm sort of think I don't have real strong feelings because it all goes back to Trump, right? At the end of the day, Trump's running DOGE. Trump can fire Musk or anyone else involved with it. And it's his executive order that even created that. It's an executive advisory group, I guess you'd call it, right? It's not officially a something created by Congress. It's more almost like a working group. So yeah, do I have a problem with that? Not particularly, because again, I think you can agree or disagree with what Musk or DOGE does or recommends or doesn't recommend, but it's all going to be, there's going to be political accountability for the Trump administration and by extension Republicans.
I guess
it doesn't concern me as much as, say, the unelected, unfireable, chair of the CFPB.
Okay. Well, I'd argue that. Well, let me kind of backtrack here, because this all came up. I mentioned it, the consequence of that lawsuit that was filed by those 14 states against DOGE, and one of their big arguments is that the administration is violating the Constitution, specifically the Appointments Clause. And in their complaint, they say Trump has delegated virtually unchecked authority to Musk without legal authorization from Congress and without meaningful supervision of his activities. And so therefore, he has essentially transformed a minor position, formerly responsible for managing government websites, that was the digital service, into the designated, I like this, agent of chaos without limitation and in violation of the separation of powers. And the complaint also argues that Musk, his ability to do what he is doing would be shocking to those who won this country's independence, and that there is sweeping authority now vested in a single unelected and unconfirmed individual, which is antithetical to the nation's entire constitutional structure. Now, Judge,
I'm not buying that, and neither was the judge.
Well, yeah, no, I think you're wrong about that. In fact, I know you're wrong about that, because Judge Chutkan, while she denied the state's motion for a TRO, her argument was that essentially they didn't make a compelling enough case for imminent and irreparable harm, but also he said there have been, because the TRO that the states were calling for basically would have shut down DOGE entirely. And her point in the order was that, well, listen, you can ask for TROs about specific things. And in fact, other folks have asked other judges about this in regards to DOGE, and they've gotten those. But you can't just have me shut down the entire thing because they're doing bad stuff more generally. And in fact,
well, or in that case, it was because we were afraid they're going to do bad stuff.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's sort of, well, if they really are and you've got some evidence and it's going to happen, but you can't just speculate that this will be really bad, so therefore you gotta shut them down.
Right. But on the merits, in her opinion, she wrote, plaintiffs legitimately call into question what appears to be the unchecked authority of an unelected individual and an entity that was not created by Congress and over which it has no oversight. And I would think, Jay, that being the constitutionalist that you are and the not big fan of unchecked government authority, that the Appointments Clause probably has some meaning for you.
Yeah, I think it does. But again, isn't it? I'm not sure where the unchecked authority is, because isn't this all we're talking about essentially is Trump's authority?
Well, no, because where Musk is doing.
I guess what would it be different if Trump's chief of staff said, "Hey, I want to, we ought to cut this and that and the other thing."
But I feel like
Trump accepts the recommendations or he doesn't.
But I feel like you're ignoring the Appointments Clause and just saying what you think should happen and forget about the Constitution, because the Appointments Clause pretty clearly says that the president has to get Senate confirmation for principal officers. And so the question here is Elon Musk a principal officer or an inferior officer, in which case the Constitution allows Congress to vest authority in the president to name inferior officers without Senate approval. And so if we look back at various precedents, inferior officers have to be subordinate to a principal officer who supervises their work, not the president, someone appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And that comes from Edmund versus United States in 1997 and some other places as well. Not only that, but according to Morrison versus Olson, inferior officers have limited duties, jurisdiction, and tenure. And it seems to me that if you apply this to Elon Musk and DOGE, Elon Musk is clearly not an inferior officer. He is a principal officer, and therefore, for him to do what he is doing and for him to have access to all he is doing and have the power that he has, he therefore, I'm not saying that this cannot happen, but I'm saying that Donald Trump can't just ignore the Appointments Clause and let Elon Musk.
Saying he ought to be confirmed, like the director of the FBI is confirmed.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And that's not a terrible argument. Although I think it depends on, and this is where things are maybe a little hazy, is what exactly is DOGE, right? Because it's not a government agency. It's not, the Department of the Treasury or the FBI or something like that. It is more akin to sort of a presidential working group or advisory group on
but it's not. Can you think of another presidential working group or advising group that has caused so much to happen? And so many, with the firings and unfirings and all of this stuff across.
Yeah, but who's done this goes back to, but who's done the firings? It's been Trump. It's not been Musk.
But what I'm saying is that you can say that, right? But if in fact this is actually happening through Elon Musk without Donald Trump, then that's not, you can't just say that and it's all okay. Because if in fact this is being run by Elon Musk, it doesn't matter what Donald Trump says is going on. It matters what's actually going on. And Donald Trump doesn't get to just say, well, no, I'm calling all the shots here, and Elon Musk isn't even a government employee. If he is exercising the authority of one, it doesn't matter what Donald Trump says.
That's where I disagree with you.
Okay.
Because I don't think that, one, if as I understand this, and maybe I'm just wrong on the facts, right, is that Musk and or DOGE, all they can do is make recommendations. They are sort of advisors essentially to the executive branch, and they're advising him on things like spending and personnel and all that. And yeah, it's still Trump is the guy, because again, it's if you live in my unitary executive world, which a lot of people do, this is the president doing that. And I think there's something different from, say, for example, Congress delegating executive power to someone, and the president saying, I'm going to have this inferior officer assist me. He's not running anything that's created by Congress. It's like Trump can, hire or fire whatever the director of the Office of Management Budget.
But
right?
Okay, I hear what you're saying.
He could hire and fire the White House counsel. He could. I put DOGE into those kind of.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, but
I don't think those folks have to be confirmed.
But
I could be wrong. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they do.
But I mean, it seems to me that you have made arguments, and not necessarily bad arguments, in the past about how under the Biden administration, advisory boards essentially had the power to mandate things, and you could right. Call it advisory, and that was not okay. And so I guess I'm having trouble understanding how it's not okay if it's done by the Biden administration, but if it's the Trump administration doing it, it somehow is okay. And so I must be missing something, because I know you wouldn't be that sort of blatantly, partisan on that and just be inconsistent. So I must be missing something.
I mean, well, to the extent, look, some of I'm not sure which criticisms you're talking about. Some of them may have been just on the merits of what the organization was doing rather than their authority to do it. But in terms of things like we just talked about, that task force for Health and Human Services, yeah, the problem there is it was an organization that is quasi-independent, and it was said, would not theoretically did not have to take direction from the president or the secretary or anyone else. They could just make their recommendations, and the companies had to do. They had sort of had independent rulemaking power, and I think that's a big problem. Also, you're talking about that mixing of the legislative function, the lawmaking function, with the executive. Those are problems where you have the executive making law, but this isn't the executive making law. This is the executive managing personnel in the executive branch. And I think maybe that's the difference that I'm seeing, it's like if you're, DOGE is sort of the super HR or something like that. And I would say that, yeah, it concerns me when the executive branch delves into essentially making law through rulemaking outside of the APA, right? Even inside the APA, there's prudential problems, right? But things like dear colleague letters and that sort of thing, where you are essentially making law versus managing the business.
So I guess if I understand your position, it sounds to me that regardless of what Elon Musk may say publicly, that I spent the weekend taking an axe to the Department of blah, 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 or so forth, that he is just bullshitting essentially. And he is saying things that are not factually true. And in the end, not only does he have the right to recommend whatever he wants, but he has essentially no actual authority on his own and doesn't need to be confirmed by the Senate?
Yes. That's what I'm saying.
Gotcha. So you don't even think there's any, because originally I thought you said that there might be something to my appointments clause argument, but you've maybe convinced yourself that there's not?
The more I think of it, and I guess it depends on how we're defining DOGE and what it does. If DOGE is just serving as, hey, we're sort of, the president's consultants, how do we can make government more efficient? And we'll make those recommendations. And to some extent, some recommendations the president can act on, like this personnel stuff. Some recommendations would have to go through Congress. I don't think that's a problem. If you are having him making policy, like someone, the Secretary of the Treasury or the Secretary of Health and Human Services, then I think there does become a difference.
Do you think there's a problem with the extraordinary level of access that DOGE has to so much government data, including a lot of, personal data on Americans?
A little bit. That's like, if you're asking me my nervousness level on that, 3 or 4.
Because there are even reports that in some instances they've taken a lot of this classified data and run it through various AIs in a not necessarily securely vetted way to try to come up with some ideas for greater efficiency or something like that.
That's a big problem in and of itself, because that's something that's already prohibited by law, right? I mean, obviously you can have safeguards, and there are thousands, tens of thousands, and maybe hundreds of thousands of government contractors who get vetted, get authorization to view this kind of data. And we've been living, that way for years. There are tons of federal employees who have authorization of this data. I don't think that in and of itself is a problem. The bigger problem to me is, let's have the government get less data in the first place, but that's another story.
Do you think it matters that, at least it seems to me that even if you're right, that DOGE doesn't have this direct authority to do these mass firings and cuts and all this sort of stuff, that it's an instance, it seems to me, where agencies are essentially complying with these recommendations that don't go through the president, but that are just sent out there by DOGE. And I'm wondering if you think there's a line at which point these recommendations, in effect, become actual mandates, if you see what I mean.
I'm not sure. I mean, let's put it this way. I would say Elon Musk can't issue an executive order. Elon Musk can advise the president, and I suppose he could, at the president's request, advise various secretaries or other administrators. Here's what I think you ought to do. And they can act on it or not act on it. Again, a lot of those people would have gone through the confirmation process. So that sort of would cure the problem there. I don't know. I think it's kind of funny, the obsession, the freak out over DOGE. Remember when we first talked about it, there was the sense of, look, they're probably not going to get a whole lot done. It will be more just shining a light on certain things, and because it's Elon Musk and because it's Trump, there's sort of a brighter light that gets shown on instances of government waste, fraud, and abuse, and efficiencies that might be had.
But I think a lot of figures, especially even some figures on the right, have a real problem with what they feel is the incredible incompetence and arrogance of DOGE, and so they're doing a lot of things.
Well, that's a different question, though, right?
Right.
You can say
sure
whether they have the authority to do it or whether they're doing it well. Two different things.
Because it seems like they're doing it pretty poorly in a lot of ways, and we sort of talked about this a little bit before. I would argue that the smart way to do this would be, instead of just sort of going in with a cleaver and firing people before you know exactly what they do, which there have been a number of clearly documented cases of firings and rehirings of people because we want nuclear safety inspectors and all kinds of folks like that. So it seems to me that this has been done with a certain wild arrogance and incompetence, at least on a policy level. I think that a lot of folks, and again, even some folks on the right, are correct in saying wow, this is no way to cut government.
I say that let's take a look and see how it plays out. We are as of today, right? What 30 days into the Trump presidency?
Not even just, well, yeah, I guess, about 30 days. Yep. Yeah.
So, look, it's been a month. I think some of what DOGE is doing, what Trump is doing on this, there is sort of a medium as the message kind of point to it, that this is a different sort of advisory committee that sort of shoots first and asks questions later, as opposed to the other, various blue ribbon panels that we've had over the years that you and I talked about that study everything and look at this and hold hearings and issue a report and are never heard from again. There is, from what I've read, it's Musk's kind of business practice to kind of go in and own a china shop and break stuff and then sort of fix it and put it back together later. You can say that's a good approach or a bad approach. I think a lot of people on the right might say it has the virtue of not having been tried, really. So,
I kind of pulling back.
And look, this is what Trump promised to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. No, I mean,
so it's
no
not
question.
Like, and this is what people, at least in part, voted for when they voted for him.
Yeah. No question there. And I alluded to this before, and you pointed out Donald Trump is a lame duck, but Elon Musk clearly is not a lame duck. I mean, he can never be president unless somebody amends the Constitution. But it's pretty clear that I feel that it's understandable that a lot of folks are at least somewhat uneasy about the world's richest man having what seems to be so much influence over our just barely billionaire president.
Wasn't it you? I mean, several months ago, back before the election, sort of wishing of, geez, I wish we could have somebody, who's accomplished, a really smart genius outsider come in and, do the old Ross Perot, get under the hood and do all this stuff. And I mean, isn't that Musk?
As I meant that, I believe, in terms of as a candidate, as an office holder, as someone who is, I would feel in certain ways accountable. I don't feel that applies to Elon Musk already. I mean, just the fact of his, hundreds of billions, there's already plenty of talk in Republican circles or rumblings in Republican circles that, listen, you do what this guy says because he could fund the primary challenge against you, just like that and not even feel it, essentially. And given the amount of access that he has to sensitive data now, who knows what and how he's going to use it? I don't know. Is some of it involve his competitors? I mean, God knows he makes a ton of money off of government contracts and involvement. To me, there are just an awful lot of red flags here, and I can't point to anything specific at this point, but it certainly makes me more than a little bit nervous, and I don't think I'm unreasonable to be nervous about that.
I think anytime you're allowing someone a lot of access to a lot of government information that is supposed to be held confidential, that's a serious thing, and it ought to be treated seriously. So I at this point, though, I other than what you said earlier, I don't know that there's evidence that it isn't being treated seriously. If it comes out that way, then that's another case. And I think the blame redounds to Trump.
Yeah, so, and I guess I think
that's where the accountability, it redounds to Trump and Republicans in general. And that's where the accountability is.
No, I guess pulling back, I think that is a fair point. It has only been a month, and it's entirely possible that a bunch of these things are going to blow up in the administration's face in such a way that the voters will feel it and will hold them accountable. Because in the end, if Donald Trump and Elon Musk and DOGE break government to the point where it stops providing important services to a lot of people in ways that affect their lives, there will very likely be electoral repercussions for that. And I can buy that, certainly. So yeah, this is kind of a related thing. A listener, a supporter, a Wasted Vote, great screen name, asked me if I was running DOGE, which agencies would I like to cut and just get rid of? And this is the interesting part to me. And how is that different from Young Mike? Young Mike would have gone in. I would have been right there. And I said, Department of Education, just cut it out. You know how I was back then. My God, I would have I would have cut the budgets.
Ron Swanson, yeah.
Well, no, I would have cut the budgets of essentially everything and given it to the DOD, basically. I just said, okay, let's go in and roll back communism. But that's, but young Mike was a interesting individual. But I guess I would say I go back to, I think there are some legitimate points that the right makes about government and efficiency and I'm concerned about big government and accountability as well. But I think the approach that the administration is taking, while completely expected given who we're talking about, isn't the best way to go about it. So I certainly think the government can be cut and that we can do better with waste, fraud, and abuse. I would just do it in a much more methodical sort of, and much less sort of just, let's post stuff on X gleefully saying, woohoo, look at, I just fired a bunch of people. That to me is distasteful and wrong for a lot of reasons.
And it may well be. I would point out the other sort of truism, though, that if you're going to drain the swamp, don't be surprised if the alligators are not happy about it.
Sure, absolutely.
And any time there's been any sense, right, of let's cut this. Has there ever been a response in the media or elsewhere that says, yeah, let's think about that. That does make sense. Maybe we really should. No, it's always we're losing essential services. People will die. All these things, right? I mean, like using the example of, USAID, if we're, turning that back for a couple weeks, the entire world is going to hell. That to me says a lot.
Well, I would say defense spending is one. It would be one example of over time where you've heard folks, at least on the left, argue for cuts and sometimes very significant cuts to defense spending.
Yeah, which is the one place where
you'd like to see more. I'm kind of with you there.
This is a fundamental conservative viewpoint. Is I rely on government, particularly the federal government, to do things that I can't reasonably do for myself. Right? There's a lot of things I can reasonably do for myself, like get my own insurance, find my own health care, things like that. Pick my own consumer products, that sort of thing. Make my own financial decisions on loans that I make or don't, or get or don't get, all those things. But I can't do a whole lot against a foreign invasion. So I rightfully say, okay, that's something that the federal government ought to do. Running a court system, yeah, that's pretty good. Some of these bigger regulatory things, environmental toxins and stuff, yeah, that's something that people can't reasonably be expected to do on their own.
And I get that.
That's where I kind of,
And you and I agree on that. Where we disagree is that, as I pointed out so many times, not everyone is as wise and well situated as the Jay Carsons of the world. And so therefore, while I certainly believe that you would not decide it would be a good idea to take a loan that had 100% interest every week. But there are plenty of people who are in desperate situations who don't have your level of financial acumen where they would, which is, again, my whole case against libertarians, saying that, yeah, if everyone were as analytically advanced as I think sort of my experience with the average libertarian has been, then libertarian principles would work great. But plenty of people are pressured or not too bright or distracted or what have you, and they need some support that someone like you or someone like me doesn't necessarily need. And I believe government has a role to play to help out those people too, not just you and me. So there we go. All right. Well, why don't we close by talking a little bit about, like I said, I mentioned this, it's been 10 years. It's according to the traditional, and we are traditionalists in some ways. That would be our aluminum or tin anniversary. So I didn't get you anything aluminum or tin.
I sent you a thing of foils.
There you go.
A tin foil hat.
Oh, excellent. That would be great. But, it's kind of caused me to reflect over the last 10 years. I listened to our first episode, at least the parts of it that I could bear. And, there was not a single mention of Trump in our first episode. You mentioned that you had just gotten back from skiing. You made some jokes about climate change. So it was a lot of it was sort of classic Jay Carson. I would say you haven't changed a whole lot. We were talking mostly about terrorism and ISIS, and God, I can't recall the last time we talked about that, and I went back. Our first mention of Donald Trump was September of 2015. We started in February. So we went that long without talking about Trump. Our take on him was he was ridiculous. We thought his ridiculousness was why he was doing so well in the debates.
Right.
And we said,
and someone would the rest of the party would coalesce around someone else eventually.
We were betting on Ted Cruz. And we thought that even if he, by some incredible miracle, long shot, won the Republican primary, there was just no way he would win the general election. And even if by some astounding other wild happenstance he did, he couldn't do any serious damage to the country. We basically concluded he's much more of a jackass than a fascist.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm still there.
Okay. I'm not quite there on the harm, especially when we talk about foreign policy, and maybe you've changed a little bit on that as well.
Well, this, I would say this last week would be indicative of some significant harm.
Yeah. But we will see. Do you remember, Jay, we actually even had a blog for a while. I totally forgot about that. In fact, it's been years since I even used the word blog. It sounds kind of like a time capsule-y sort of thing. And, I was thinking about the people who've been with us. Trey joined us in 2017, so not that long after we started. Then Ken came on in 2018. We had May 2023, Justin just last year, and all the hosts that aren't with us anymore. We had Kristen for 3 years, and I still miss having her around. She was unfortunately, as you recall, hounded out by people who decided that they didn't like her views on COVID so much so that they
canceled, as they say.
Yeah, they called her work and made trouble for her and all that kind of stuff. And we also had, here's some names you might remember. There was Will, Brian, Athena, Alexandria, Emily, Ryan, the dear departed who weren't with us necessarily for that long. But yeah, and when I looked at our supporters, and 75% of our supporters have been with us for 3 or more years, and over half have been with us for 4 years or more. And I think it says a lot about we kind of got to that point in those early wild west years of pride, and it was a great time to be a podcast because no one knew what they were doing. Companies were throwing money at podcasts. We didn't get a lot of it, but we got some of it. I still tell people the story of at one point, I forget what podcast hosting company we were with. I sent them an email saying, I need a new mattress. Is there a mattress company that can send me a mattress? And they were like, yeah, sure. Casper can send you a mattress, a $1,000 king size mattress. And what I need to do is just do a couple ads. And no one thought anything about that. And it was crazy. It was a great time, but now they've wised up and we don't get free stuff anymore and not that many ads, but it was a fun time to be a podcaster. It's pretty crazy, but
you got most of the swag, I think. I'm trying to think what I
did get most of the swag. Yeah. I got the mattress. There was they sent me like meals. I think it was Blue Apron, some other things.
Did we do like Dollar Shave Club?
Yeah, we did that.
I remember getting like razors or something.
Yep, razors, and I got some clothes from someplace. I don't know. It was like one of those fancy dress sort of things that didn't work. But the point is
living like a Biden.
Oh my God!
I tell you, the razors are really all I remember.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But that's long in the past. But no, when I really think about it, I think about our supporters, and like I said, it really blew my mind how many folks have been with us for so long, and we established that base early on, and it's just been so great, not just getting to know some of our hosts over time, like May and Trey in a very different way and Ken in a different way, and Justin more recently, but interacting with so many listeners who became supporters who in some instances actually, became, I consider them friends. And that's been just so incredibly rewarding. And I never, ever would have thought that on February 22nd, 2015, when we published that first episode, that 10 years later, we would still be doing this and it would still just be such an incredibly meaningful part of my life.
Yeah. I would have given us like 3 or 4 months.
That first year, we went from February until August, and we took the summer off. And it's like, we're taking summer vacation. Then we came back.
Those were the days, man.
But yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts you have on 10 years of this aside from who to thunk it?
Well, it's been a wild 10 years.
It really has. We've seen a lot.
I think that's something that's significant. It's been 10 years something other than the political world that you and I both grew up in, right? Like you could say, if you started a podcast in 1980 and did it until 1990, you would have seen change in America, but it wouldn't have been the type of thing we've seen.
Yeah, for sure.
You wouldn't have been radical realignment. I mean, George Bush was sort of Ronald Reagan light. The major positions of the parties didn't change much throughout those years. I mean, there's issues here, there, that kind of thing. But a Republican in 1982 and a Republican in 1992 wouldn't have been all that different. But I think that there has been some significant change, and we've been witness to it, Mike.
It's been Donald Trump.
I don't know that we've done anything about it, but I think my role, your role is we try to contextualize it a little bit.
Well, I'll say that in this 10 years, I feel that discourse has gotten in general so much shallower and so much angrier. And so I feel that what we do now is even more important than it was 10 years ago, because there are so many there are so few places where you hear, I feel like, conversations where both parties are arguing in good faith. And actually, I feel listening and trying to understand and not just trying to own the other side or win, but to actually work for some understanding. And I feel like that's largely true of all of our hosts to a greater or lesser extent. And I think that's what makes us important to listeners. And I always try to adhere to those ideals, even though at times it can be, more than a little bit challenging. But Donald Trump's been like the Spanish Inquisition, because, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Yeah. There you go. And we sure didn't expect, we didn't even cover his golden escalator moment. We just thought it was just a big, PR stunt. And here we are 10 years later, still talking about Donald Trump. So there we go. All right. Well, with that, thank you, Jay, and thank everyone for listening. I know many of you have been listening to us for the better part of 10 years. Whether you've been listening to us from the very beginning or just became a supporter and listener, thank you so much. This is just an incredibly meaningful thing for all of us, and we're glad that you get something valuable out of it as well. And as always, I want to close with a very special thanks to our wonderful executive producers. They are Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. We'll be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope you'll join us.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,